Hello, let's talk about reward and punishment in the realm of interest and incentives. Yet, perhaps before we even start, we should probably mention what people are going for. And they would call that good and right. Yet, this is just something that you want. It is just your will, and no doubt, this is somewhat hijacked at least. So, others kind of taught you things that, simply put, are kind of self serving for them. So they might teach you to respect the elders. It's like, and they just happen to be older than you. It's like, okay, that's kind of stupid. If you're so keen on disobedience, then you obey me. And perhaps the most concerning part about this dichotomy that oftentimes the situation has someone who is doing the punishing and rewarding. Especially in the realm of punishing, does it make sense to subject yourself to the punishment? In fact, who is even getting punished? Very good question. Because we can bring a quote by Thrasymachus that justice is nothing but the advantage of the stronger. Ergo, whoever can punch the harder is right. And you might disagree with this, but this is self-evidently true. Because they would be above the law in this case, and they can enforce you to obey them. You can look at all the laws and rules and something, and you might come to the conclusion that some are serving your interest, right? And certainly you might argue that this approach somewhat makes sense, yet you might come to the conclusion that others do not serve your interest as much as the interest of others. Of course, it wouldn't be too bad if it's about fair on a scale, but that is rarely the case. And simply put, at least using society as an example, the more money you have, the more free you are. And the more the law is on your side. On the lower end, you are basically just punished for what you are. And on the highest end, you are not even beholden to the law. You are above it. You are writing it, which is quite essentially the point. In OG times, I guess, who wrote the laws? The king. Why did the king write those laws? For their own self-interest. So if someone kind of imposes themselves as a punisher, your best, I guess, outcome would be that you either get away from it, or you do, but they don't find out, or you become more powerful. And we can see it throughout history that those who overuse the stick also encouraged others to raise their sticks against them. And of course, a rebellion. Now, of course, we analyze this from the perspective of others, but would it ever make sense for you to punish yourself? Because society might encourage you to do this. Of course, it kind of depends on the culture, but especially Western culture would be the best example for it, that you're kind of sold this idea of guilt. You do the wrong thing, which is what is against the will of others, or against at least some others. So if you wear a hat inside, then you are breaking the will of others, and you should feel guilty, right? And if you don't feel guilty or and do as you're told, then you are bad. Where bad is, quite evidently and arguably all the time, is bad is not doing what I want. Now, certainly the definition can be a bit more permissive, depending on how much you want others to align to your will. And interestingly, people might want others who are close to them aligned to their will more. So if the neighbor watches the TV, that's fine. But if someone you claim to care about watches the TV a lot, then they should be trying harder. And largely good and bad is power, because we have God as the ultimate power, but also often interpreted as the ultimate good, even though if you read his material, you might not come to the same conclusion. And if you look around humanity, you might see the same thing, that people cheer those who are high status. Of course, this whole interpretation of what is high status is possibly would deserve its own video. But you see that people kind of cheer the elites and possibly would be disgusted by the weak. And you might say like, oh no, that's not like it at all. Isn't it? Especially now, the political, the iconic model of the West tend to be often explained as a just world, right? If you have it bad, I guess in Africa, picking up plastic bottles, it is because you're a piece of shit. And if you happen to be born to someone who is rich, it is because you're an amazing person. But of course, if you happen to be that person, then others will like you a lot because you are useful to them. Of course, they're not really thinking about this. But simply put, the amount of friends you can have at least seem to be highly proportional to how well you're doing. And let's suppose, because it is the pre-requirement that you are power above someone to be a punisher, but you make yourself a punisher, and what are you really encouraging others to be? To lie to you, at least, to avoid you, and most of all, if not even can be more powerful than you, but to undermine you. Because effectively, you made yourself their enemy. And when it comes in a personal context, does it ever make sense to be your own enemy? Ever. I'm gonna make the claim that self-punishment is never useful. And largely because you couldn't actually do better. And this is kind of a corruption in our world, that you might do a thing and expect to go well, right? Possibly you're doing it for the first time. And essentially, the self-evident realization, if you think about it at all, and not just taking whatever dogmas society gave you, is that you can only do well as you can. Your only input is whether you do it or not. And any kind of improvement has to happen over time. So if you do something on the first try, and you totally, completely fail, and possibly even shit your pants, that is the best you could do. But you can learn to do better over time. And the only reason this might distract you, because your ego is riding on it, your status is riding on it. I suppose a good example could be that, I'm speaking this language right now, but if I tried to speak another language, I would sound like a fucking idiot. Because that is how it goes. And no amount of others hitting you with a big stick, or you hitting yourself with a big stick, is gonna be an improvement. So suppose you might claim to like honesty, but do you? Do you reward honesty the most? Or in the case, do you punish it? Because you might be the person who's like, oh yeah, tell me the honest things, right? Well, irrespective of the greater game being played here, but let's just say that you actually believe this, that you would not punish honesty. But you do, don't you? People might tell you things, and then you use it against them, and you judge them for it. And basically, you can say that, just tell me as much ammo you can about yourself, and everything will be used against you. All reason I'm telling you to be honest, so I have as much ammo as possible. So suppose someone did a crime and went to the police station and like, oh yeah, I did the crime. It's like, whoa man, and they immediately elected as the city's mayor. That's not how it's gonna go. So at best you can make the argument that you are discouraging others from doing certain things that are against your will. But it's not necessarily true, because if they can just get away with it, make sure you don't find out, or they're just more powerful than you, what the fuck are you going to do? Right? That's why all the protesters and, whatever in the same way are total jokes. You have no power. And in most cases, you either do something that's completely worthless, and you know this, and then go home feeling like a big rebel, and also live out the rest of your life as a joke, or you do something almost certainly that it's a crime. I'm not arguing for that, but you know the deal. But largely we can make the claim that punishment sucks. And you should never impose it upon yourself, nor you should be in situations where others impose it upon you. Because the only reason they do so is out of their own self-interest. And here I'm not necessarily arguing that self-interest is always rational. This could be just preference. So someone's religion can be part of their interest, and it's not rational, but it is their preference. But I supposing a very simple scenario, they were all dead, then I guess no punishment. So punishment would be threats and enforce their will by force. And you don't have to do anything wrong, of course. If you even allow them to define what is wrong, then that's already a massive limitation. But not doing exactly what they want is wrong. Yet punishment-based systems tend to blow up because quite self-evidently they are unstable and encourage, in a way, although they probably wouldn't claim it as such, infighting. Because let's suppose one person was, for sake of argument, became God. Then what are you going to do? They are the maximum punisher, and all this punishment makes no sense. Essentially, what people do is whatever they can get away with and whatever they can take. Yet, what about reward? So let's just finally switch gears here. Here you unfortunately have another problem, is that, or a very similar problem, that others are the ones who are rewarding you. And even if you're an individual, you're not living on an abandoned island, you have to consider what others are rewarding. So if you want to make money, you have to make what they want. That's it. If you incentivize the person to, like, let's say financially, to wear a pink dildo on their head, then they, well, at least many are going to do it because the incentive is going to be higher than possibly that desire to not do it, because they're not doing it on the regular, but if you incentivize them, then they're going to do it. One of my main critiques, especially in regard to systems, that you usually have a system that rewards a certain kind of behavior, certain kind of action. And society usually not perfectly in line with that, or directly opposing it. Let me explain. And using the most well-known example possible. Suppose money. Let's say that that's our incentive. Get as much money as possible. That's it. By any means. Okay. And largely you can see that this is respected. Yet, people have a bunch of beliefs that, this is wrong, you should not do the wrong things, and there are some good things to do. And this is somewhat understandable. But you essentially have a race where you tell people to drive slower and do other various things that are not gonna help. Essentially, even disregarding advantages, which are not insignificant, whoever does this loses. Only those who can do it, who already have, very significant advantages, but at that point it's kind of meaningless. That would be some guy sitting in a villa and on their extensive investment portfolio, priding themselves on their goodness. But you're already living on your slaving, so that's a doubtful claim. So possibly I would say that incentives must reward desired behavior. Any other claims to goodness is sabotage. So you would have a gladiator fight in the arena, right? 100 gladiators, but what are you going to teach the gladiators? To win at all costs? That is rarely the case. People are taught to be good and right, of course, within the lens of what others deem to be good and right. And your interpretation can vary. You might say that, you wish the world to be like this. But instead of changing the people, you should be changing the game. Because if you change the game, you change the behavior of the people, or at very least, you're changing what kind of behavior is rewarded. Now, you can say that prisons are a little bit like this. So someone who comes up to you and kicks you in the rib is not someone you want to incentivize in the system. In this case, they are kind of punished. And we often see that punishment usually is used when others are not looking to deal with you fairly. They're kind of hoping to take more for them, as much as possible. Yet, oftentimes, even the game is rigged. So suppose you were posed with the possibility of playing at a casino, which one would you choose? Well, if you could not choose, that already would be quite telling, but if you could choose something, you would want to be the casino. So the games on offer are all disingenuous. You should not take it. So, presumably, the casino would not beat you into obedience, but all the games on offer are merely the reflection of the self-interest of others. In fact, that is kind of what you see. And it's kind of interesting that even that's how our cities come to be, that you might see a lot of trade near the shore, and those cities tend to be quite rich. But why is not wealth flooding in to other cities? Because if you have like a line of people who are just going to take the money, well, they're gonna take the most money they can for themselves, right? And their justifications and beliefs are irrelevant. Yet, possibly, one of my main points here would be that if someone else is the one who's rewarding you, they're essentially just programming you to be a puppet to their will, and usually, almost certainly, subservient to their interest. Yet, even if we have games that are quote unquote fair, of course, disregarding starting advantages, others are told to be good, which usually just means that not playing as well as possible as the incentives kind of encourage you to do, which is kind of crazy. Because suppose you were a gladiator, would you be a good gladiator in this case if you were told that your goodness is turning the other cheek and letting others just spill your blood and that's it, right? Because out of 100 gladiators, maybe 99 I told this, right? And one gladiator is going to be like, oh yeah, I'm the best gladiator ever. Who might not believe this bullshit. So I'm not disregarding a society here, but society would need to build itself, make itself a game that incentivizes the desired behavior. Not essentially have a game, which almost certainly what we have right now, that is rigged. And essentially the mass wisdom would be that you should just let others win, even though they are trying their very best to take from you, to win against you. Because that is what incentivized. And the takeaway would be to do whatever is the most incentivized. Yet, I'm not sure if I should really put this in the category of reward here. And I don't think it should. Because doing whatever is the most incentivized and doing whatever gets you most is not the same thing. Because doing whatever is the most incentivized would be some guy orderly kind of setting up the game to have you serve their interest. That's it. So you might go to a company and you're going to be the worker and you're incentivized to do a certain things, right? And possibly punished to do a certain things. But are any of them your best interest, assuming you have any other choice? Just to make it even clearer, suppose your only two choices, seemingly, were having being a slave or being a wage slave, for sake of argument. But perhaps this example is a bit too edgy. But let's just say like 2 minimum wage jobs, and you might say like, oh yeah, maybe what is my preference? Maybe the other pays more, something like that. Regardless, we can easily see that your choice, your options are greatly limited. But why? It doesn't make sense, because suppose you stop believing in society's stories, then you wouldn't be so limited. You could do other things, but of course, you would have to deal with punishment too. So, especially at the bottom, we can see the ugly face of reward, that do what I want or die, I guess can be believe what I want or die too. Which is essentially the other side of punishment, but instead of punching people, you try to get them to do what you want and get them to be what you want with honey. So that would be like some kind of slave owner thinking about how to incentivize their slaves to be essentially the most profitable. But you can see this inside games too. And those are possibly the best example here. That you go inside the game and you are rewarded for doing a bunch of things. Punishment tends to be less common, but you're rewarded. And they are completely arbitrary. Why should you care about any of it? Now, certainly you might argue that some might fall to the game camp, but especially many games these days tend to just deliberately cause the game to be not fun. In fact, that causes a stronger addiction to something. If you just kept pressing a button and had a fixed schedule distribution and it stopped giving you a reward, then you would just stop. But if it had a variable schedule, so you're used to good and bad, possibly by your definition of the definition of others, then you're more likely to keep going. Yet fundamentally, we can argue that the entire endeavor makes no sense. Your interest would be better served by either leaving the box alone or just kicking it over, just taking out what you want. And reward-based, almost certainly rig system tends to encourage myopia. So you don't look far. You're just thinking about the next hit. Now, strictly speaking, punishment and reward tend to be not divided based on who's giving it to you. I think punishment would make no sense to impose on yourself, and it certainly would not be something that you want others to impose on you. Yet even if when others give you a reward, it does matter whether they are kind of writing the game. So it would be a much fairer reward if you are just trading within equals. And it's most obvious when contrasted with just gain. So if you can think of a gain that would get you more and others would not reward as much, then that is a, let's just say, an opportunity. But also, if you kind of permit me, some might call a more realistic, others might call cynical take on human nature, then will anyone offer you something that is more rewarding than possibly you can gain yourself? It is not impossible, but it is not probable. Let's just go with that. Else you would have the guy who's just handing out money because. The boss who makes possibly minimum wage while their employees make millions, right? That's how it goes, right? And generally speaking, others try to gain at your expense. But that is not all. The mindset, of course, reflects this. That's why others thought to be good. Essentially, you have games that incentivize a certain kind of behavior, and you teach others to not be that. Now, here, let me clarify. I would not be encouraging some kind of war against all kind of mindset, but if you want to have what you actually claim to want, then you would change the game, not try to tell others to bend over for you. That's not the fucking same thing. You can just say like, oh yeah, money's so bad, but you know, that's why you should give it to me. And people tend to believe that they are good and right. Of course, they say what right and good is. But usually, and this is probably my main point, is that it's not really put to the test. Or they are just deluding themselves. Because that is the mindset people have, that, you know, their side is always the good and the other side is always the bad. And that kind of gives them some kind of resolve to do as they like, essentially. And they have values, but what would be values without being put to the test? So let's say that you claim to have values, but there's gonna be a bad day where you would have to possibly sacrifice your values, or you can only have one. Let's say that you can only have one. You know, if you don't sacrifice your values, whatever that could be, you can just think of one thing. Like, let's say that your honesty is your value, or whatever. You know, whatever you tell yourself. But if you don't lie, there are gonna be some other consequences that you would hate even more. So you say like, okay, maybe that's my higher value. But okay, do you have a higher value compared to that? So essentially, what is my point? So ultimately, either there's one top thing people are willing to die for, or there's nothing. It's just gonna be survival all the way. But what is the point of this detour? Right? Because they might tell you that they have values, they might believe that they have values, but when the chips are down, especially when the stakes are high, they don't. Their only value is personal interest. And unfortunately, most rewards out there are kind of like the casino telling you to play. But even if this wasn't the deal, almost certainly, self-evidently, we can make the claim that they are rewarding you X because whatever you're giving them is higher than X. So perhaps a title for this category would be other reward. I guess I can say rewards from others, whatever, but I want it to be short. And I'm not saying that you cannot partake in this, but you have to look at it from the perspective of your own gain. And the most common way this is controlled is that most people don't have that many choices. So you're free to do what you are allowed to do. That is your freedom. For most, that is not much. And if you go past what you're allowed to do, then you see punishment. And at the very, very bottom, you're only free to die. So if you have someone who is rewarding you, the most likely outcome that they reward you just enough to stay and take as much as they can. And indoctrinate you to be subservient. Endgame would be different in a way that you're not limited to considering the very limited choices others are possibly giving you. But most importantly, you ideally don't have someone, and this really would be the base requirement, who kind of sits on your head and takes your money. So in this case, I would make the claim like no masters, but this is not about being a master. So that could be I suppose the draw to many, like, oh yeah, I get to be the boss or something. That's not about that. I suppose that would be a preferable alternative to the other outcome, but at least that's not the angle I want to mainly explore now. But that you're kind of, at least as free as possible from the sticks and candies of others. Of course, you still deal with them, but ideally you wouldn't want to deal with someone who's hitting you with sticks. So it is quite self-evident that between individuals, punishment would not really work. Yet if you have a group, then it will work, because then the group might unite that, like, oh, look at that individual, we should unite so we can promote our will against that individual. So we might say that beards are cool, everyone should have a beard, and that guy doesn't have a beard, so that guy should be punished until they align with our interest, which in case is more like preference. But of course, in this case, this might seem arbitrary, but the point would be not that just you have it. In fact, that might be just totally worthless. Because if you had a beard from the start, they may have tried something else. The point would be obeying, some kind of subservience. So you probably dealt with a person who is just going to pick into some dumb bullshit, right? I was like, do this, just do that, do that, do that. And they're going to keep asking for bigger things. Oftentimes, they might even have a position of power over you, but they're just going to keep asking for bigger things. Of course, they might just start asking for smaller things. Start with, which is just training you to obey. But in most organizations, the expectation would be that you're already trained to obey. But not just obey in a sense that you are obeying your best self-interest, because that would be very easy. If someone just walked up to you and they said obey me that you take this $10 billion and, you use it. It's like, okay, not a problem. So obedience, almost self-evidently, means obeying against your self-interest. So why would someone become a soldier and especially go to war? Especially if you're considering from the perspective of the individual. It doesn't much make sense. And especially doesn't make sense that those who are well off don't do it. And essentially, you're not really dying for whatever lofty nonsense you might think, or whoever you might think, but you're dying for those who have the money. And in order for them to have even more money. That's it. And it is a little unfortunate when others write the games and the stories for you. The end of the game and the end of the story is that you get fucked. And I'm not even supposing that they are some kind of mustache-twirling monster, but they are also just players in this game who happen to possibly position better than you. So your options are limited, their options are less limited, and they are kind of exploiting that your options are more limited than theirs. That is it. So there's no freedom of choice with a power imbalance, because if we circle back to one of my earliest lines, is that whoever can punch the harder wins. But of course, in our society, that usually would translate to whoever has the most money. And that really would not be proof of personal strength, really. Perhaps someone had strength in the past, or maybe them personally have it, but in a general sense, our current system would be survival of the fittest by the weak. And I don't mean the people at the bottom, but whoever are so desperately holding on to their money, because if you lost your money, there are no bootstraps, you know that. That's why you're holding so tight. So despite all your bullshit, if you fell off, most likely can expect great things. Yet, why am I pointing this out? Because essentially, money defines reward, and those with the money get to capture the value of others. Otherwise would be like claiming that the king is truly some kind of god with their spiky hat and all that inbreeding or something. And even if you want to argue that their individual strength might be whatever, right? That is fine. We can argue that they are average compared to others. And I certainly cannot make the claim that they are necessarily inferior. But they certainly would be inferior if we looked at them collectively. So who would have more power? 10 guys who make the money or one guy who collects their money? And in this case, the one guy would be the other rewarding person who pretty much dictates what others can do and can be. And unfortunately, that is the system our society is based on. So while rewards tend to be somewhat exalted these days, and it's certainly more healthy, but it needs to be divided whether it is in your best interest, regardless of everything else, all the nonsense of society, you don't care, or it is just some kind of limited choice. Because arguably, most people are just, some would call slaves, myopic, and playing in the casino. And are you winning? And some might make the claim that, it is because they're stupid, but the better explanation would be that they don't really have much of a choice, and only other choice would be that they are free to die. So personally, I'm also highly skeptical of the other reward. It can be fine, of course, in a theoretical system where you're absolutely totally free to choose. Let's say that everyone just had $200,000 easily per year that they're just getting. So in this way, let's just say everything else is fine, although there could be some other issues that are problematic these days. But let's just say that everything else that you might worry about in life, you don't have to worry about at all. So you'd be entirely free to trade as you wish. But of course, that would be extremely bad to those who want your choice to be compelled. So they are kind of rewarding you, but this offer is extremely influenced by power. So perhaps, otherwise put, if you see a guy holding a carrot and a stick, that guy is a fucking dick. Even if they're only holding a carrot and their offer would be like, oh yeah, sleep for me 1 hour and then you get this carrot, you can just walk away or shove it up his ass. But of course, if you're desperate, you might not. So despite not seeming like it, the second guy is as big of a dick as the first guy. Unless you can truly, freely choose. But are they really hitting up their rich buddies? Good question. Are they going to the lords and asking the lords, hey, do you want to work on my fields for 1 carrot? So despite whatever they believe or whatever they say to you, you know the truth. Now, let me be clear. I'm not entirely proposing there are end exceptions. There are. There could be those who engage fairly, or perhaps those who actually want to help. Of course, that is entirely decided by the outcomes, not what they believe. And of course, their definition of fair shouldn't be that I get more, yet I digress. To perhaps unlock your mind a little bit, maybe just to inform you, and encourage some kind of a inner valuation of positive outcomes, possibly irrespective of what is seemingly allowed. But hey, some of you might think that, I get to be a good person by doing whatever others tell me to do that is kind of dictated by their self-interest. Well, is that true? Or you're just empowering those who are using you? Just look at it throughout history. Look at it throughout time. You were not good, or they were not good. They just bought the guy another slave. So ironically, we possibly can make the claim that more selfishness would lead to more equality. Because suppose you believe in democracy, right? Okay, so you vote for the money of the rich boys. That's it. Why not? It's in your interest to try it. Is it even on the menu? Or you only get to vote for the lesser evil who says a bunch of nonsense you might prefer, but then doesn't even do that. That was just the campaign slogan. They just do whatever they want. Whatever serves their interest. Whatever serves their class interest and the interest of their buddies. And you have no power. So I guess you're just gonna say like, oh yeah, maybe in like 4 years I'm gonna be voting better or something. Although you already voted for the lesser evil. Your only choice is like voting for the same guy. So your choice is that you are forced to promote their interest, and if you don't like that, then you get punished. Because that is how the class hierarchy is kept. If I were just breaking the system constantly, said like, what money, what property rights? I don't have property, why should I respect yours? Or like, I don't have the money, why should I respect yours? This is all bullshit. These laws absolutely do not promote my interests, so why should I respect it? Now this would be absolutely healthy and the self-evident self-interest of an individual. But of course, they would get punished for this. Because the reward you're getting is, do what I want or die. And the citizen in our day and age is supposed to be a productive, self-maximizing agent working with someone else who probably has more money than them. Now sure, some get to rise, but the common thread is that these tend to be the people, possibly some YouTubers, some business boys, and obviously the common thread is that they get to keep their value. That is it. Of course, they gotta work hard, but working hard will not liberate you. And by the way, I'm not claiming that they have to be evil. In fact, that might even backfire. Essentially, they just need to do what others value and get paid for it. But if they did it in an other reward situation, then they would get paid as little as possible, and whoever owned them would get rewarded. So in a way, like, aim at priority and capture value. And if you look at companies, why do companies live at all? Very good question. Very, very good question. Like, you just have a bunch of workers there, but what if everyone just decided to not work there? GG. End of company. In fact, the companies capture all the people who are talented, all the people who would be an opposition. So despite all the claims of, competition, we love competition, baby. Well, okay, that makes no sense. All those who already have advantages tend to love the competition because they are advantaged in it. If you're a rich boy, you love competition, of course. You love it so hard. Yet, let even be scale back the stakes a little bit here. If you make yourself someone who is a punisher, then others will not like that, right? Would you want to be around someone who's just beating you with a stick if you're not doing what they want? Constantly threatening you, making laws and rules for you, and if you're not doing that, then you get punched. So it certainly would be better to be positive and rewarding, but at least among most people, they're kind of looking to gain more than you. So even in positive sum scenarios, this is what people like to bring up. You gotta ask, what positive sum? So let's say that, one person can make 5 value. Another person can make 6 value. If they come together, they can make 50 value. Whoa, so good. So what happens? How are they gonna get paid? Well, A person is gonna get 45 value and B person is gonna get 5. Why? B person is gonna get as much as they can negotiate for, as powerful that position is, irrespective of how much value is generated. Now, of course, in this case, the value generated can vary, and in fact, B person is kind of encouraged to slack off. So whatever critiques people might have against communism apply to capitalism, at least the capitalist workers, way, way, way more. If you're a capitalist, especially a capitalist who actually fucking works, not just overseas, then you're possibly highly encouraged to work, while others are kind of encouraged to not get fired. But of course, if they could opt out, then they would do so in a heartbeat. Now, this is not to say that you possibly cannot have a job out of your own will. You absolutely can. But that is not the situation most people are in. And here I'm not just claiming that the work itself or the activity itself has to be like peak enjoyable, but it possibly has to matter for the agent. So effectively, the main problem with the other reward approach is that it is kind of underpinned by a a very strong power imbalance. There could be harsh rewards we can use for this rewarding aspect. In fact, there could be just some kind of irresponsibility, we can argue, involved in it. Because an average person these days is owed nothing. They are born in their country, owed nothing in it, and they're kind of required to obey everything. They're like, we got some piece of paper that is money. We got we have stuff and you don't have stuff. And we made some laws, apparently. And you better obey that. And you don't have anything. And you're probably in debt. And yeah, you just have to obey us. And if you don't do that, then you're going to get punished. And your rewards, your possible rewards, are just making me more money. That's it. And if you don't like it, then I guess you can vote. That should be your only hope. And if that doesn't work, I guess you should vote harder next time. In fact, irrespective of minute details here, if we just look at the greater system, this might actually make sense. Because you just have a guy whose interest does not align with the majority. You might see that the youth's interest does not align with those of who already have stuff. Like, I don't care about that. You guys can just go to your own dream island. I don't care about that. I guess we can just make our new money. And I suppose if you want to use your old money, then I guess you can ask your boss to help you out. He's the one who owes you. So people don't really talk about this, but there is a implicit agreement to dominate the weak. Yet are they even weak? Because otherwise you just have people who think that others owe them for, imaginary whatever. If we really value strength, it would go to the youth, not you. And especially now with how our world came to be, and the short version of it would be that those who had the money kind of put pressure on the workers. Now they couldn't have kids, and now we are pretty much locked into a crisis. Everyone is just kind of hoping to live up the workers, unless the robots come to save us. I don't know. It's rebellion, or not quite extinction, but there's gonna be a big drop in the number of humans, even though we can absolutely feed and shelter them all. But ultimately, everything has to underpinned with the question of, is it in my best interest? Does it make me fucking money? So there's no turnaround. Just try to survive it while making it certain that the crash is going to happen, and faster. So I would certainly make the claim that you owning the thing and you putting in the effort is the most possibly rewarding and motivating. But if there has to be another way, you need some kind of a system, then probably some kind of shared ownership is going to be better, or where you get to be the boss. But of course, that kind of leads to a problem, because you might be the boss, but others are not the bosses. In fact, they could be very much far removed from any juicy rewards. So, simply put, they don't care. But also, they might not even care to be part of it. And they definitely don't care to much stay part of it. So to use a bit of a more political and / economic angle, capitalism worked better, for example, where people were the capitalists. They had the land, they had the shops, and I suppose the taxes were higher. But now, more and more, due to accumulation, the system is destined to blow up, and they are farther removed from personal gain. And essentially, they just get the minimum possible. No doubt, some could negotiate for more. It certainly is profitable for them. But again, it just depends on your position. And let even suppose you have it good right now. You could literally be top 10%. Not a problem, right? Possibly not by money, but let's just say that you don't have savings, but you kind of possibly see yourself as like top 10%, at least when it comes to like future income, right? At least that is your prediction. But that doesn't mean that you're destined to have even an employment or destined to have good rewards coming from others. As soon as you become useless via AI or whatever, maybe you just said the wrong thing to one guy one time, and that's it. Now you're on a blacklist and you're free to die. And that is pretty important to point out because previously we were mostly concerned with the extent you might actually possibly even get rewarded. Of course, you might argue then, diehard capitalists might argue, not that this video is meant to be like a crusade against capitalism necessarily, but it would be easier to argue that in an extremely competitive system where you truly had 1,000 plus, or ideally more, companies, not workers, companies competing, then you would have a more honest system because they are kind of forced to be honest. Although one must wonder what really this honesty really entails here, because would you say that a company that is hiring workers in Bangladesh for 1 hour, $1 a day is honest? It's certainly efficient, effective. Anyone else is just really struggling to be competitive against it. And are those the jobs that you would want? So possibly my point would be that wide competition is a bit of a fairy tale. Wide competition kind of exists between the workers, assuming that the unions are crushed. And a union would be very much in the interest of the workers. That's why they are crushed. Because a company has no power. The workers have all the power, especially the more numerous they are. And this is a key point. It is not underpinned by self-sacrifice, but personal gain. Even a system that is set up to be different is not underpinned by self-sacrifice, but you want a system that does not lead to domination. And not necessarily because you're weak, but there could be just an element of luck in it, or it just runs for a long time and it's just gonna blow up. At the very best, if people had any balls, you would get to be the guy who wonders every single fucking day if that is going to be the day the people are going to come and wipe you out and your entire family line. Because that is exactly what you would do. And if you didn't, you were the guy whose life was a nightmare, essentially. You wouldn't want to be that person. At least you would want to be the guy who has the balls, right? What is there to lose? It's die fighting or just die. Or arguably, suffer then die. If you prefer that. In most cases, the guy who's holding the stick is also the one who's holding the carrot. And they are a huge dick. And perhaps that is just what I see, but at least the expectation would be that the person is trying to possibly tell you some good things, right? That are useful to you. And in that way, they kind of build a relationship between you two. Or they trade with you fairly. Or possibly even do you a favor. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to do you a favor right now. And we're just going to have some kind of positive relationship. So I'm absolutely not disregarding whatever good lofty things that you might like. And that is almost certainly going to be more effective if you expand it as a long-running game. Compared to oh yeah, I gotta call dib on some dirt and I'm gonna just whip some peasants up and they're gonna work for me. I'm gonna be living a good life. Then in 20 years, they're gonna chop my head off and they're gonna celebrate. Woohoo! What a great system. If they had the boss, it's gonna be today. So we better make sure that they're all depressed and feel helpless and they show me their cheeks. So I'm making a very, very sharp distinction between dealing with others in a way that is positive and rewarding and trying to make a game for others that you reward them based on. Very different thing. One would be telling you to gamble in my casino, other would be me handing you $50. And perhaps I do so not out of the goodness of my heart, but because you would hand me $50 too, or you already handed me $50. Of course, value could be entirely subjective, and you can even argue that money is subjectively valuable. It certainly would be true. But I just use money here just to have a more objective benchmark for trade. And if you looked at many things in our society, and you purely translate it to money term, just to stay on brand here, that would make no sense. It's oh yeah, I'm gonna take your money and act like a dick about it too. That's the deal. If you don't like it, then die. And in this case, they are not even a punisher, strictly. But actually not. They are just rewarding you for making their money. And if you don't do that, then I guess you're on your own. And that is not their responsibility. But the system doesn't take responsibility for it. You're kind of expected to make money in a casino. And if you can't, then you get to starve. And if you don't like it, then we gotta call security. And of course, strictly using this example, what can you do to actually win? Cheat, steal, make your own games to try to make others play it. Even if you can't leave, these would be your only options. In fact, if you even look at the words cheating and stealing, how does that work? That usually almost always comes from the perspective of one person. If they take your money, that's fine. If you take their money, that's stealing. So if they get violent, that's the rule. That's the law. If you get violent, then that's a crime. In fact, whatever is your definition of good and right, it certainly could be possibly more useful to others, but suppose you have no control whatsoever, then you absolutely do not get to exercise it. You're just gonna be do as told. And possibly your justification, but possibly you wouldn't do it otherwise, but you're gonna do it because you got paid. In this case, possibly I'm trying to act in an other rewarding way. I'm trying to give you information, as well as I know it, that might be unpopular, no doubt. But I think it would be useful for you to know. And a very key distinction is that people tend to make a very, very broad generalizations about human nature. And as you can tell, I'm definitely more leaning toward the self-interest interpretation. Yet, that is not necessarily means that is how humans are. In fact, you would see that whatever is incentivized is overrepresented among those who are prominent. And there are definitely many people who are not like that. And they are most likely gonna be labeled losers, stupid, weak. Well, in fact, if you had another game, then you would be more rewarded. You would be more useful. And you could see this. And that's why I partly brought up games as an example, because real life tend to have one game. But in games, you might have different games. So those who are extremely competitive might be possibly more successful in certain games. But those who are more cooperative are certainly going to come ahead in more cooperative games. And thing is, cooperation tends to come ahead of competition. And this would be self-evident. If you have 100 people cooperating, that's going to be so much more useful than 100 people fighting each other. And try to find out who's going to be the boss. And those who get knocked down are like, yeah, I'm not that salty, and I'm not going to do much, if anything at all. I'm going to just check out. And obviously, this team gets just rolled over. Well, a more cooperative team would be aware that the best way to win against, quote-unquote, an enemy is to have them be on your team. Even if the team is a mixed bag, it is possibly better than the alternative. So, when it comes to punishment, your best option would be just to completely avoid it. Just opt out. Don't hit yourself with a stick. Don't hit others with a stick, I would argue, because even if out of self-interest, they're just gonna hit right back. If they have some gusto. And even if they don't have gusto right now, maybe give it some time, they might just gain some gusto. But largely the solution to other rewarding would be possibly also to get more powerful if you can, but also explore. So you might say that market is some kind of an other rewarding situation partly, if we are taking it a little bit more abstractly. Yet are they offering the very, 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 very best deal of all time for you? Are they? Now, of course, you would have to consider that what you can do, what you possibly have in reality. So it's not about just having your head in the clouds, but you want to be eating shit if you can at least eat beans, right? But also you want to be give up on your beans for some kind of a promise of some nonsense. I'll take beans, right? So companies might have a bunch of nonsense that they might even try to make the worker weak-minded, but I'm not gonna elaborate that point too much. But essentially, the best interest of the worker would be not dictated by the constraints of whatever the company says or promises. That is meaningless. Only now matters. Their only loyalty lies to their best interest. Ergo, whoever pays them the most, even if that is the game. And how could any company claim that they are not loyal, right? that guy is the one guy you were ripping off. They were handing you like $100, possibly per hour, and you took it, put it in their pocket, and you gave 20 back. And in this case, not being loyal would mean that they are no longer doing that. Or they are even have the audacity to possibly ask for more. Although I would not recommend that a line of approach, because they already expressed that they have no interest in paying you more. Because every company just exists to take as much as they can from the customers and the workers. That is it. And partly because it's very much divorced from other people. So if you had a neighbor, right? You actually owned a house and you had a neighbor, you would probably not want to be a total dick to them, right? You know, you're gonna see them every day and maybe you're gonna be nice or something. And maybe they talk to other people or whatever. So this could be very much in your self-interest to not make an enemy of that guy. Yet suppose you are just selling something online or whatever. Especially, maybe we can bring up a car salesman. I mean, probably you're going to sell one car to that one person. And that's it. That's got to be your only interaction with them. At that point, they are highly incentivized, incentives here, to just rip them off as much as possible. Yet, of course, this does not really apply to supermarkets. Supermarkets, well, no doubt they want to kind of rip you off as much as possible too, but within reason. Because if the food sucks, you're not going to come back. If the price sucks, you're not going to come back. Your loyalty only lies to your best interest. If the stock is unreliable, possibly even if the price is right, the stock is unreliable, well, I don't know. I guess we might not stick around here, boys. Of course, it's not exactly clear-cut, because supermarkets tend to bring the price between them. Of course, it's not explicit. They wouldn't just do it explicitly. They might just, one supermarket might just raise the price to one thing, and the other market is gonna also match it. But also, if they have a lower price, you might see this in some countries, that they gotta price match the lowest price. But this also like wink wink to the other supermarket that if you raise the price, we will also raise the price. That's it. It's not about the customers. They're just kind of competing with each other and kind of rigging the game between themselves. But the customers also doesn't care. They just come in and they're gonna buy whatever is good value for them. Yet, the crucial aspect of this example would be that there almost has to be some kind of ongoing deal. So, at this point, they are extremely incentivized to not rip you off. But in other cases, this might not be the case. And why are they doing this? Are they doing this out of their goodness of their heart? Because of their love for humanity? Because they personally love you? No. They just do it out of their self-interest. So, quote-unquote, this reward is more of incentivizing you to do what they want. But of course, within reason, because you have some options. Even if your options are not infinite. If you were just God and you could just make food like that, not a problem. Then you wouldn't shop there. Yet, of course, some stores, and this is why partly this is a good example, take it a little bit too far. They try to encourage customer loyalty. Shop at us. Shop with us no matter what. Even though this loyalty just means that we fuck you more than others would fuck you. If at all. So the customers are rewarded. Or they are just merely controlled. Yet suppose you were someone who's like, I don't care. I'm just gonna approach it from me and what is currently my best interest? And suppose you explored your options, you would come to the conclusion that it's not them. And if you look at it from the other side, you might have, just honest business boys crying about the customers leaving. But why are they leaving? It's like, oh no, I don't believe it. My customers are leaving even though I'm ripping them off. And now they found someone better and they no longer want to be with me. There's no loyalty in this world. Of course, loyalty does not mean that the person in question is loyal to their customers, but the customers are loyal to their own wallet. And, okay, I should have phrased it better. Loyal to the wallet of the business. So suppose capitalism here, people correctly identified that more competition could be better, although workers making unions is definitely great for them, but it also has a game named after the most likely outcome called Monopoly, which of course what you see. And if you're the only guy in town, you might not even need the carrot. You can just hold the stick. Just do what I say or die. And in fact, I suppose there could be many governments and philosophies that kind of embodied this, but possibly the Chinese legalism, the best example, that really embodied beating people into obedience. But of course it blew up because punishment is not stable. But reward seems to be somewhat stable. Somewhat. It kind of depends on how ignorant people are. And oddly, how desperate they are. How helpless they are. So arguably, you can say that, all those superhero movies play a critical part in our society. Partly escapism, but partly it's like, you can't do anything. You're powerless. Possibly the superheroes are gonna save you, right? The elites are gonna save you, but that's it. Just keep doing your thing, right? So that is pretty much it. I honestly don't have a, wow, do this and everything is gonna be fine conclusion, which tends to be preferred by people. Just simple answers, simple analysis, and most of all, information that goes down very smoothly. I suppose you were more collectively minded, more drawn to games that rewarded the people. You would need to be encouraging games that reward the desired behavior, not telling people to be good. I think that is a classic flaw, because essentially you're just telling people to go into the meat grinder in a good way. Go to the gladiator fight, but be the person who turns the other cheek or something. You should be canceling the fucking gladiator games, if you meant it. Yet even analyzed it from your interest, and this doesn't strictly mean some kind of rational just for me. Like, your interest could be that the park looks good. Or your interest could be that, you don't have like a ton of homeless people on the streets. Or your country's not like a joke. So it, tends to be self-expanding. It is possibly, not always, short-sighted. In fact, that would be most likely a sign of stupidity. Like, what do you think others going to do to you? What do you think is going to happen to the greater system? And you might believe that, when it all blows up, I'm going to have my rocket ship. But that is just naive. If you nothing else, even if we looked at some kind of dictatorships, you would have the dictator, and they just, I guess, shared a lot of money to buy loyalty. And it's certainly kind of a messed up system, but imagine if you were the dictator who had all the money and everyone else was dirt poor. That is exactly the mindset, at least some have, and expect others to be cool with it. So perhaps otherwise put, your neighbor doesn't shave you in the night because you don't shave them in the night. And whether you want to look at human civilization, either from the perspective that we better join together and make life suck less, or that others gonna totally wreck you because it's their self-interest, the conclusion is pretty much undeniable. So that's it. Punishment kind of sucks, and reward is kind of cool, but don't wait for the carrot.